Well, it's Friday night, and that means it's Atheist Bible study night again. I'm back by popular demand this week. Thank you so much, Prof. MTH, for encouraging me to start the series back up again. And just a quick question to all you Christians out there: where are the Christians, man? I mean, don't you guys like to study the Bible? Yeah, it's please join in with us here. Anyway, this evening it's going to be kind of a transitional discussion. I'm going to be going from talking about sickness to talking about sin and Jesus' attitude towards the law. So what we're going to do is first of all we're going to roll back up because remember, if we compared the story of the healing of the leper in Mark with the same story as told in the Egerton Gospel, we saw some salient differences. And I'd like to just briefly rehearse those differences. So once again, I've put in parallel columns here the story of Jesus healing the leper as found in Mark and put it next to the same story as found in the Egerton Gospel. And it brings salience to the point of, how Mark is telling the story differently from everybody else, how they're telling the story. First thing, the green text here. Jesus stretches out his hand and actually touches the leper. And we've seen this was actually against the law of the Old Testament to actually touch lepers. Very much forbidden. But Jesus Christ goes ahead and does it anyways. And another salient difference between Mark and Egerton Gospel is that in Mark, if you see the red text there, Mark always emphasizes this secrecy that's there. Mark is adding to the story. This Markan secret is not found in Egerton whatsoever. But the Egerton Gospel does have something that Mark doesn't have. Egerton Gospel explicitly connects the sin of the leper with the disease of the leper. Sin no more. And also in the Egerton Gospel, remember, Jesus does not touch the leper here. So it seems like the Egerton Gospel has two things over on Mark. It seems like it emphasizes the connection between sin and disease. And it seems like it doesn't have any interest whatsoever in this secret business. Now you'll see immediately why this is kind of interesting. So it seems like this story about the leper was kind of like floating around out there before Mark wrote his gospel. And many writers of the gospel, whoever wrote the Egerton Gospel grabbed that story, and Mark grabbed that story, and they told that same story in their own special ways in order to emphasize their own special perspectives on the story of Jesus Christ. Okay, so the interesting thing is that Mark, emphasizes the secrecy and he de-emphasizes the connection of disease with sin. Okay, now the reason why this is so interesting is that the very next story that we find, in the Gospel of Mark here, seems to be completely opposite. It seems to accord much more with the story as told in the Egerton Gospel than the story just told a few paragraphs above. What I'm talking about is the first story in Mark chapter 2, the healing of the paralytic. All right, so here's how this, I'm talking about Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, all right? And as we'll go here, see, keep your eye on two different things, First of all, whether or not there is a Markan secret here, and second of all, what is the connection between sin and the connection between disease, and how does this relate to the divinity or the humanity of Jesus Christ? Okay, so let's just read through this really quickly together. So I'm going to read the story here, Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. Now, as I'm reading it, do pay attention to the questions I just asked you to pay attention to, but also think about this, right? Okay, if you're, pretend like you're living in Rome in about 50 A.D., all right, and you've gotten a copy of this Gospel of Mark, right? Chances are you can't read, Chances are somebody's reading it to you, right? So the Gospels actually were meant not to be read, They were meant actually to be read aloud. So, just see how the story comes across as, somebody's just reading the story. Okay, here goes. When Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days, it became known that he was at home. Many gathered together so that there was no longer any room for him, not even around the door, and he preached the word to them. They came bringing him a paralytic carried by 4 men. unable to get near Jesus because of the crowd, they opened up the roof above him. After they had broken through, they let down the mat on which the paralytic was laying. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Child, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there asking themselves, scribes again, right? "Why does this man speak this way? He is blaspheming. Who but God alone can forgive sins?" Jesus immediately knew in his mind what they were thinking to themselves. So he said, "Why are you thinking such things in your hearts? What is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise, pick up your mat and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins on earth," he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, rise, pick up your mat, and go home." He rose, picked up his mat at once, and went away in the sight of everyone. They were all astounded and glorified God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." Okay? So how would you feel if you just heard a story like that? You got a letter from maybe Mark was in Rome, and the letter had a copy of the Gospel of Mark in there for you to read aloud, and somebody's like reading the story to you here, but interesting. Okay, back to the questions again. Okay, notice the story of the healing of the paralytic in stark contrast to the previous story of the healing of the leper does very explicitly make a connection between sin and disease. So it seems almost like Mark is self-contradictory at this point. It seems almost like if Mark would have told the story about the leper the same way as it was in the Egerton Gospel, it seems like he would have been more consistent with himself here, right? Because Mark seems to explicitly take out of the story of the leper the connection that there's with sin, right? And what's more, where did the Mark in secret go? Jesus is explicitly saying, right in front of everybody there, a huge crowd, he's saying, "So that you know that the Son of Man can do thus and such, I will perform this huge miracle right in front of your faces," right? Where did the secret go? It's really mysterious here. How just in the course of these two stories are right next to each other in the gospel, but they just seem so totally contradictory. And what's more, we actually have the same story from another gospel, and it seems like it would fit better here. So we have a mystery here. I mean, it's like why is this going on? Well, I don't know. There's lots of theories. My personal theory is that we're kind of in a transitional section here. We're transitioning from talking about Jesus' healing ministry to talking about Jesus' confrontations with the scribes with regards to the law. So this is kind of a transitional thing that's going on here. Okay, now there's several other very interesting things that we need to talk about here in this passage, though. First of all is notice the robust theory of mind that is demonstrated here, right? The scribes and the Pharisees, towards their outward appearance, they're doing nothing. But inside their minds, right, they're thinking, this guy is blaspheming, right? What's more, Jesus is portrayed as being able to read their minds, right? Jesus is a mind reader here, right? Also, it's very interesting. Okay, never in Mark does it explicitly say Jesus is divine or Jesus is God, but okay, this is a very heavy, kind of like connect the dots yourself kind of thing, right? It's like who can forgive sins but God alone, and then Jesus just goes ahead and forgives some sins. Well, draw your own conclusion, right? So. Even though Mark is the earliest gospel that we have, okay, even though it does not give him any sort of divine birth story, even though it does not give him any sort of, there's no virgin birth or anything like this. Jesus is just an ordinary guy until he gets baptized by John. After he's baptized by John, okay, Jesus has been exalted here, and Jesus is kind of making some interesting claims for himself. Now, the reason that this is interesting is the scribes are thinking in their minds, okay, they haven't said anything out loud, that Jesus is blaspheming. But, recall, blasphemy is exactly the charge which in the end of Mark, Jesus is brought up and is actually executed for. Okay, claiming that he was doing the things that only God could do. So the charge of blasphemy here is right at the very beginning of Mark's gospel is when the blasphemy happens, and it kind of foreshadows the end that's going on. So it's kind of like hanging over all of this thing is Jesus is out here making some very outrageous claims, and is really getting on the nerves of the mullahs equivalents that they had back then, and it's inevitable at this point that something bad is going to happen to Jesus.